Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's ISE webinar, which is brought to you in partnership with Amberjack. We've got a really great session lined up for you, lots of really interesting insights into the current early careers market. Amberjack have a wealth of student data and also data from all the employers they work with. So I'm really looking forward to getting a really good picture of what's going on out there in the marketplace at the moment. I think from the ISE perspective, it's quite a challenging market, but as I keep saying on the back of our survey, we're not in reception, so need to be careful about going doom and gloom, but I'll be really looking forward to hearing what our panelists have to say today. I shall be chairing the session, but very shortly I'll hand over to Emily, and then I'll come back on at the end and field any questions that you have as an audience. So please do use the chat, use the Q&A. If you've got anything that you'd like to ask the panelists, there will be some time at the end, and if we don't get to all the questions, the team at Amberjack will also be able to follow up. So please engage as much as you can. We like to make these sessions as both as informative and as I said, as an engaging, as interactive as possible. So that's enough for me. It's the Amberjack Insights you're really here to listen to. So Emily, can I hand over to you to get us going?
Indeed, thank you very much, Stephen, and a very warm welcome to everybody to the Amberjack Insights 2024 webinar. My name is Emily Bryant. I am Group Head of Marketing at Amberjack. For those of you who aren't as familiar with Amberjack, just a quick overview. We are a tech-enabled outsourcing organisation working predominantly within the early careers space. We support our clients across the entire life cycle, from attraction and campus engagement through to assessment and selection, and more recently, learning and development. In terms of our insights research, we've actually been running these reports now for 12 years, unbelievably. And each year we have some, great trends and insights to share with the industry. The research is made up from two key data sets. We have an employer survey, which we send out over the summer months to both our clients and the broader industry to get their feedback on the latest recruitment season, what they found and trends, etc. We also then anonymously analyse our candidate application data from sort of the applications that have gone through our candidate management platform, and we work in partnership with Fearless Futures on this, and I'll introduce you to Ruby a little bit later. In terms of our presenters today, I'm joined by the team at Amberjack. So we have Sue Hadley, who's our Head of Attraction. We have Martin Kavanagh, who's our Head of Assessment, and then Jenny Fitzgerald O'Connor, who is our recently appointed Head of Learning and Development. And as I mentioned a minute ago, we are also joined by Ruby Clark, who's Director of Solutions at Fearless Futures, and I'll let her give a little introduction to their organisation when she comes on to present. So let's kick off with the employer survey. So just a little sort of few points before we delve into the data. There is going to be a lot of data thrown at you today, and we're going to rattle through that. Just so you know, there will be a full report released from next week, and we'll give you the opportunity to register that for that report at the end of the webinar. We will also have sector analysis for certain sectors as well, so watch out for that. But for the purpose of today, what we try to do is I guess pull out the sort of the most interesting highlights and prominent trends for you. So the employer survey this year was completed by 75 early careers employers, and 50% of those completions were from Amberjack clients, but then also 50% organisations that aren't currently working with us. So great to get that insight as well. We have representation from 18 sectors, and just to be clear, the analysis is looking at the previous recruitment season, so from September 2023 through to sort of spring summer 2024. So the first question that we asked our respondents in the survey were what were their top 3 priorities. And we ask this question every year, but this year we changed the format a little bit to a more open-ended question, just to glean some more insights. Diversity, as you will see, is right at the top there, which has been common for the past couple of years, followed by quality of candidates and employer brand and awareness. This year, we did see a couple of new challenges, sort of priorities pop in, mitigating and adapting to AI, which is probably no surprise, but also social mobility and the importance of that when attracting and recruiting new talent. And what have been the main challenges? We've done a comparison here with the 2023 data as well, and you'll see that there's no change with the top 3 positions being budget, diversity and inclusion, and team resource. We do see that other has crept up there as well, and within other we have challenges such as recruiting regionally. We also have the support of the senior stakeholders in terms of early careers, and also AI crept in there as well. So albeit sort of there's some, there's, I guess, year on year similarities, we have seen some change slightly further down. And I am now going to hand across to Sue, who's going to talk you through attraction.
Thank you, Emily. So, as Emily mentioned, we're just going to start calling out a few key headlines in terms of attraction today. 27% of respondents have basically shared that event sign up this year and attendance by students has been by far their biggest challenge. We have a look at some of the other challenges around events a little bit later in the deck, but on social media, LinkedIn is remaining significantly the most effective social media channel for student engagement. We do see more graduates using this to understand more about potential employers in the market, combined with the access to their job board. It's not surprising to see, but that is a staggering amount of efficiency that candidates are seeing through LinkedIn. 44% of early careers employers are not using external available labour market analytics to inform their strategy. And there is no significant change for us in the questions around AI in attraction. Only 17% of respondents are actively using AI in their attraction campaigns at this time. So if we have a little bit more of a look in terms of events, we can see that the most significant change this year is improved success when running events face-to-face. This has grown from 28% last year to over 40% this year, which really backs up the thought that students are preferring face-to-face engagement with potential employers and getting to know and understand them. We can see, though, that employers are continuing to take a more balanced approach when they're meeting students in person, balancing that with the practicalities of capacity and cost, as we all know, and incorporating virtual events into their schedule. And when combined, you see similar success levels over these 2 formats. However, the success of running virtual events for student engagement in the attraction field has declined from over 11% last year to just 4% success rate this year. We did ask respondents to tell us if they had any significant issues when it came to running events. The experiences that they were coming back to us with in terms of issues off the back of the event format question, we found that it was really similar year on year, but the most significant change was basically event availability. And I've just stepped out of a client meeting this morning where they have expressed the very same. We test to our own experiences here at Amberjack of getting events booked up early, and it's very key to planning successful schedule in the future. We asked 2 ad hoc questions, if you like, this year, 2 separate questions to the normal rankings and ratings. We asked respondents to let us know if they had access to, and we're actively engaging with external labour market analytics in informing their campaigns. 44% responded saying not. A future follow-up question for us would be to understand from where they are accessing that data. There's a range of sources available, obviously, in the market, but not always available to interrogate to great breadth and detail. So definitely one that we will be following up on it in a little bit more detail. And our second question asked whether employers were sponsoring student societies, and it's been a little surprising to see that nearly 80% have responded no. This is perhaps a sign of a continued shift away from tactics that are more difficult to demonstrate return on investment for employers. Delving into social media a little bit more, as I mentioned in the headlines, there are some movers and shakers in here, but LinkedIn is taking the lion's share with 88% of employers saying it was their primary source for social media engagement. And Ruby touches on this a little bit later when she talks about candidate media sources as to the effectiveness of that. And not surprisingly for Gen Z, what we are seeing is that Facebook is dropping in the ranking for effectiveness. Student engagement on YouTube climbing, which supports the notion of Gen Z responding well to video content in all formats across all platforms. And our final question in the report for attraction was focused around AI. We wanted to understand how employers were using AI in their attraction campaigns. 37% of early careers employers were saying that they weren't sure how AI could fit into their attraction campaign, whilst 32% are saying they already were or believe there could be a use for AI in attraction. And we only seem to have about 8% of naysayers when it comes to AI. So really understanding what that looks like will be the future of what we can do to engage. And I think that might be a subject we revisit in the springtime as people prep for new season. In quick summary, from an attraction point of view, we're seeing an increased take-up and success with face-to-face events, but still some challenge with student sign-up and attendance, even some issue at the offset by being able to secure the first choice events for employers. Social media preferences, engagement rates continue to change across platforms, and whilst LinkedIn appears to be most significant, as I say, Ruby will give you some insights into just how effective that is when we drill down into the data a little bit later on in this session. And AI adoption and attraction certainly seems active and open, but where and how to roll it out are still under some evaluation, it seems, by employers. I'm going to hand over to Martin, who's going to talk through the assessment and selection section.
Thank you very much, Sue. So this is my third year of presenting at Insights as the head of assessment at Amberjack. So delighted to talk you through the main assessment and selection themes. This is probably the year I've been most excited about seeing the data, because it feels like of all of my experience in volume assessment and assessment methods, this has felt like the biggest shift year that we've seen. And mainly that's because of, started going into this campaign, the concerns around generative AI. So we did ask about the impact that's had on assessment processes. So the first headline finding is, interestingly, only 40% have made changes this campaign in their assessment process in response to advances in generative AI. I was wondering whether the biggest challenge people would find would start to be reporting candidate quality. Perhaps they're not seeing authentic candidates. Perhaps candidates have been able to game the assessment processes. But similar to the data Emily was presenting, diversity and maintaining diversity for a pipeline continues to be the biggest challenge in assessment processes. We always look, perhaps for morbid fascination, at how many clients are using CVs in their process still, despite the widespread knowledge of them not being particularly valid predictors of performance in assessment processes. Around half of the organisations who responded are still using CVs in their process. And a question I'm always asked is, the final stage process, is it being managed predominantly in person or virtually? So it's not got to a majority yet, but the largest response of any of the areas was fully in person. So 38% of respondents are managing their final assessment stage fully in person. So let's look into a little bit more of the detail. As I said, we look at the biggest challenge in terms of the 5 return on investment areas we look at. So diversity and inclusion, quality of candidates, engagement. It's that diversity area that is coming up as the biggest challenge for people still. I mentioned the statistic around, are people changing anything in response to the adoption of generative AI? 40% have changed something, and you can see on the right the sorts of things that are being introduced. We went a little bit further with this question, and we were asking, okay, what are you seeing in terms of, are you seeing a significant improvement in performance that you're putting down to candidates using generative AI? So to be clear on this data, we've taken out anyone that said not applicable, so anyone who aren't using these methods in their assessment process. So this is just people who reported using CVs and online assessments. So the clear takeaway is that the CVs and video interviews are the two that clients are most likely to say, organizations are most likely to say that generative AI is resulting in a significant improvement in performance. The ones that are more robust against the use of generative AI based on the responses coming from organizations are what I call multi-criterion assessments. So when you're assessing candidates in multiple different ways. So that's what happens in a blended assessment. That's also what happens in assessment centers, which are performing very well against this data. So you can see here the area where the biggest response is coming out, where saying that, you know, it is having an impact, is in video interviews, where 23% of those who use video interviews were saying that the use of generative AI, they believe it has resulted in significant improvement in performance. And that is consistent with research, academic research, which is showing that if someone uses a verbatim response from ChatGPT to a video interview question, they do typically achieve the benchmark. So more and more organizations are thinking about what needs to be done in that area. As I said, the more sort of resource intensive methods, so telephone interviews and also assessment centers, are the ones that seem to be most robust and most avoiding any impact of generative AI sort of masking the results and avoiding you seeing perhaps the authentic candidate. So encouraging for assessment center activity there. This is useful as a benchmarking tool. We just always ask organizations what recruitment practices they have in their process. So always an interesting stat that 96% use online application forms, and as I said earlier, about half use CVs. We've probably all seen the sort of viral posts on LinkedIn where people are, you know, do a screenshot of an online application form where they're asked questions and they say, look at my CV, look at my CV. So interesting, there's still a lot of organizations that are doing both. We also look at, okay, that's what are being used. How effective do you believe the different methodologies are? Now, this was on a 1 to 7 scale. If the bar is skewed to the right, that is seen as a more effective method of assessment and selection. So again, we're seeing good performance here for the multi-criterion assessments. So assessment centers and blended assessments are seen as the most effective in all of those areas. As I said, widely known challenges with CVs, that's coming out in our data with quite a lot of people reporting them as not being effective assessment and selection methods. We've seen a shift. This is the first year where entirely in person has overtaken entirely virtual. The other call out from this graph, which is really interesting, is that 26% are using what I would call a hybrid approach. So either in person or virtual by default, but candidates can opt to take the other methodology. Often this is seen as a sort of social mobility thing. I know certainly some clients who aren't able to or don't provide expenses to candidates think for a social mobility perspective to allow people to join virtually and fit it in and around their sort of other work is a good thing from a social mobility perspective. Interestingly, the research is really clearly showing that if you put people through the same assessment methods in person or virtually, you're more likely to score more favorably the people who are seeing you in person. So those 26% could be putting certain candidates at a disadvantage through their process. Another piece of research that's coming through really clearly is that people who give a realistic job insight and tell people about the organization they're applying to have a competitive advantage. So that 47% of clients who are using assessment processes that are completely bespoke to their organization would have a competitive advantage. There's 9% who continue to use completely off-the-shelf assessments. Appreciate that could include smaller employers who are recruiting less people on a year-by-year basis. So perhaps the upfront cost of designing bespoke assessments is prohibitive. A couple of other statistics that we always monitor and we're interested in. Time to offer has increased for the first time in a while, going up from an average of 9 weeks last campaign year to an average of 12 weeks this campaign year. And you can see quite a lot of variation within that there. And offer acceptance has remained very, very static. So we're seeing 87% and, you know, a negligible drop to 86.8%. In this year's data, and so you can see there again the range. Some lucky organisations who are getting 100% offer acceptance, which is great to see. So in terms of the sort of main takeaways from the data, obviously, as Emily said, more to follow in terms of sector analysis, in terms of commentary around what we're seeing. But typically, if you are using a hybrid approach to your final stage assessment centre, think about the potential risks for that. Multi-criterion assessments are holding up as more positive in terms of their effectiveness, and also how that they're better in terms of some of the challenges that we're seeing in the market. There are some assessment methods, particularly the video interviews, where we are seeing issues in terms of predictive validity, particularly with certain clients. So work with your assessment provider to see what you can do to manage that in your sort of calibration training and your how you prepare assessors. And then, as we always finish off with, if you are still using a CV on top of an online application form, do you need to, is that adding anything to your process, or is that just creating a barrier for candidates? So on that, I will hand over to Jenny, who will be able to take us through the data from an L&D perspective.
Thanks, Martin. Is that going through? Sorry. Emily, have you given me control? Yeah.
Try again. There we go.
Oh, right, there we go. Sorry. Right, hi everyone. Thanks, Martin. Just to start off with some learning and development headlines, sharing these for the very first time, which we're really excited about. I'll go through these in a little bit more detail over the next 5 minutes or so, but just some really positive highlights coming out of the data, bringing development workshops into the onboarding strategy and other areas which I'll talk through and can be easily resolved with the right interventions and support. Just to start off with, let's take a look at moving into the post-offer part of your recruitment campaign. You've invested a lot of time and effort into the successful attraction, recruitment and selection process. It's now critical that those who you want to hire and have offered to join you on day one. As we all know, application rates are at record highs, in part due to the ease with which candidates can make applications thanks to AI, and clearly the economic climate fueling the uncertainty. Therefore, more applications are being made. While renege rates have been pretty stable, averaging about 10% in the last couple of seasons, we are expecting these to rise. And so it's becoming more important than ever to ensure you've got an engaging and effective keep warm strategy in place to build that connection with future joiners and therefore try and keep the renege rates as low as possible. But what could this really look like? We're encouraging our clients to use the post-offer pre-joiner window. Having no difficulty, sorry about this, getting to the next slide. Okay, so we're encouraging clients to use the post-offer pre-joiner window to run development sessions to support their early talent in making smooth transitions into the workplace. And this is brilliant for a number of reasons. As we know, we're hearing a lot about Gen Z really wanting to be supported ahead of starting their graduate programs. They want to learn and develop their professional skills, and new grads can connect with each other, forming that peer network before they've even joined. You can ensure that your grads arrive on day one with that greater level of confidence and well on their way to building some of those key professional skills that their teams really need them to have early on. I think the good news is that over half of you are already doing this, running development sessions as part of your Keep Warm offering. 37% of respondents are also bringing these into development sessions onto campus to start upskilling whilst they're still at uni, and again building that confidence and ultimately making their transition into work that little bit less scary. And the earlier we can continue to try and do this, the better off we'll be and the more confident our graduates will be when they join. No surprise then to see that communication. Sorry about this. So in terms of delivery of programmes, we certainly see that the majority being delivered face-to-face and virtually, so as part of that hybrid solution. This works really well as it allows cohorts, particularly global cohorts, to come together for face-to-face engagement, but also from a collaboration and networking perspective. And typically we would see this once a year, but it's still really cost effective as the majority of the workshops and interventions can be run virtually. And we certainly use some really powerful technology so that these virtual sessions can have as much impact as those that are run in person. No surprise to see communication and work etiquette ranked highest in terms of the skills that your early talent cohorts need to improve on most. Perhaps the most frequent conversation I'm having with organisations certainly centres around this growing gap between expected professional communication and business etiquette skills and those which graduates have when they actually join. And again, this could be a key focus for a keep warm or induction period to try and recognise, why this is lacking in graduates. A lot of noise and talk in the market about an imposter syndrome, but then to also support graduates and make sure that they build that confidence to improve. Finally, in terms of the key focus areas for your graduate programmes, the most important there, ensuring the entire programme is market leading with relevant interventions and workshops throughout. And this really points to ensuring that organisations are clear on why the programme exists and where they want their early talent cohorts to be at the end of the programme. We always start with that as an area of focus, and then this will ensure that the design of the programme is meaningful, it's aligned to your overall strategy, and importantly, that the transfer of learning from the workshop to the real working world is high, providing the time to practice what has been learnt in a workshop or intervention is always just as important as the workshop itself. So in summary, really recognising the strengths and weaknesses of Gen Z, ensuring that they're being set up for success, using that pre-boarding, post-offer window to build their confidence and develop the key skills that they need to really thrive on day one. And then having a clear understanding of why you've got an early talent programme in place, what you want your graduates to achieve on it, where you want them to be at the end of the programme, and ensuring that that transfer of learning is really high. So more to come in the report, but I'm now going to hand over to Ruby to talk through the candidate side of the survey.
Thanks so much, Jenny. Hi, everyone. So my name is Ruby Clark, and I'm Director of Consultancy and Data Solutions at Fearless Futures. Fearless Futures is a diversity, equity and inclusion consultancy. So we support our clients in various solutions that include data analysis, diagnostics, solution building, implementation, the whole way through sort of DEI intervention and data solutions. And really excited to be presenting to you today. This is our second year partnering with Amberjack, and it's one of my favourite projects. I look forward to the analysis and the insights every year because the data is so rich in terms of candidate journeys, and we know how important it is for all of you as employers who are here today to understand what are the DEI trends and insights season on season, and what are the opportunities for interventions and tweaks that might bring about the kind of outcomes that we know you're all committed to. So today, we're looking at last season, so 2023 to 2024, as Emily said at the beginning. This year's analysis covers over 3,800 wow, I can't get that out today. 386,000 applicants to roles across 32 organisations in 11 sectors. Clearly, I've been too deep in the data this week. The majority of the applicants this year were to graduate programmes, so over 70%, nearly 15% to apprenticeships, just under 10% to internships, and less than 5% to placements. So they are the applicants that are included in our analysis this year. So lots to get through. I'm going to start by going through an overview of the pool this year. So we'll have a look at the demographic of applicants. We'll look at some breakdowns by gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic indicators, and disability status as well. We'll then have a look at the distribution of media sources and which yield the most offers as well from different applicants. We'll have a look at university background, education background, both in terms of overall applications, in terms of volume, but also in terms of which are yielding the most offers on the whole, on average, but also in terms of sector specificity and in reference to particular demographic backgrounds of applicants. We'll have a look at how candidates move through the pipeline and what the offer rates are looking like this season. And then we'll move on to look at key trends on offer probabilities. So the predicted likelihood of certain applicants receiving an offer, which is really, really interesting and allows us to bring in some more sophisticated modelling, which is one of my favourite parts of this project. Finally, I'll share some actionable recommendations for employers that we hope can help to support strengthening achieving some of those DEI outcomes for the next season and beyond. So starting with an overview of the demographics for this season, and we'll start by having a look at gender. So among the applicants for this season, we see a majority, 60% of men, 38% of women, a small percentage who didn't share their gender identity, and less than 5% of applicants shared that they were either non-binary, another gender identity, or transgender men and women. So that's how the gender makeup was looking. We also had data on socioeconomic indicators. So this is in reference to social mobility. One of the questions, or one of the data points, I should say, is whether the applicant received free school meals. So we have just over 15% of applicants who were on free school meals, 53% not on free school meals. Also a large portion here, over 23%, were overseas applicants. So for those applicants, this indicator is not applicable. A small percentage chose not to stay or shared that they weren't sure how to answer this question. And then over on the right-hand side, we also have this data point on whether the applicant was in care. Over 95% sharing that they weren't in care, so a very, very small portion who shared that they were, and just over 3% choosing not to state. So as we move through the data, we focused on free school meals as our socioeconomic indicator in terms of the richer analysis on outcomes for different applicants. We also looked at the demographic breakdown in terms of ethnicity and racial identity. And we have really, really rich data here. So we saw representation of applicants across multiple racial and ethnic groups. We can see at the top here, white applicants are the largest group, followed by South Asian applicants, and then Black, followed by Chinese. Also, just to draw your attention here to who is in this other grouping. So these candidates, because we had very, very small samples, we grouped those together just in terms of, again, the more sort of detailed analysis, but wanted to make sure that that was visible for you all as well. This is just in case anyone is a fan of a tree graph. This is another kind of visualization of the same data. So those larger boxes show representation of the more heavily represented groups in terms of ethnic and racial identity in the data. And then finally, in terms of the demographic breakdown, we had this data point on disability status of applicants. So on the left, we're just looking at whether a candidate had a disability or not. And we see here around 7% of applicants shared that they do have a disability, with just over 90% sharing that they do not, and 2.5% choosing not to disclose. On the right-hand side, you'll see that we have this really rich data in terms of what kind of disability an applicant has. So whether it's a neurodivergence, a hearing impairment, long-term health condition, and so forth. And so what was really interesting for us to see, what the data showed us this year, not just in terms of disability, but across the demographics, is that where candidates, applicants are given the opportunity to share their identity and background, they're actually really forthcoming in giving employers that detail. And as we'll see as I move through the rest of this session, this presentation from me, having this data can really unlock insights for employers into into the experiences and outcomes of different applicants, how they're faring through the process, and based on other factors like where they're applying from, university background. And so that can give employers this this detail for where they're having success or where there might be opportunity to improve for particular applicants that they want to improve outcomes for. So we hope that employers can feel incentivized to know that if you give candidates the opportunity to share this detail with you, often they will, and that can be really helpful and instructive for your DEI goals as well. And there we have, again, a tree graph just to show the level of detail of the different kind of disabilities that folks shared this season. I'm going to move on to talk about media sources. So we're looking here at, what's the media source that candidates were applying to roles from. And this slide shows applicants by media source in terms of volume. So we see that jobs boards were the most popular, followed by employer websites, and then university, LinkedIn, internet search, and so on. Internal referrals, employee programs, and word of mouth were down there in the bottom three in terms of volume of application. So that's in terms of volume of application. And then we had a look at media source in terms of offer rate. So which media source backgrounds translate to or lead to the highest offer rates. And interestingly, there's almost an inversion of the data. So whilst internal referrals were very low in terms of volume of application, they do produce the highest offer rates when it comes to media source. We saw jobs boards was the highest in terms of volume of application, but it's right down there at the bottom alongside LinkedIn in terms of the percentage of offer rate. And as we start to kind of look at this data in more detail, we'll see that can also be really interesting in terms of who disproportionately in terms of demographic is coming through these media sources and the variations in terms of gender, ethnicity, and so on. So we'll get to that shortly. We had a look at the different stages reached by applicants throughout the process this season. And I'll just start by sharing this to begin. This slide illustrates applicants by sector. So we see certain sectors, professional services, engineering, utilities up there at the top in terms of high levels of applicants and moving down. We wanted to know what the kind of offer rates were in the stages that folks were moving through. So when we were looking at the different stages, we decided to take out the ongoing and withdrawn applications so that we could really confidently say, well, what's the average offer rate that we're seeing for Amberjack clients this year? And that comes out at just under 5%. So 4.58% is the offer rate on average for employers working with Amberjack for this season. We had a look at the specific offer rates on average across different sectors, and you can see them there. I won't read them all out, but I'm sure this will be interesting to you if you see your sector there. So I encourage you to have a look at the report as well. That will be coming out soon. But right up at the top, construction 3.45%, and then moving down, we see how those offer rates vary. Finally, in terms of our overview, just having a look here at university analysis. So to begin with, we see the top 25 universities. This is for all applicants on this slide here. And we can see that the Russell Group is indicated in red and non-Russell Group is indicated in turquoise. So very, very strong presence of the Russell Group institutions in the top 25 in terms of where the majority of applicants are coming from. The Russell Group is also in the top of the charts across professional services, financial services, and engineering. We zoomed in on these sectors because that's where we had the biggest sample. So we can sort of say confidently that these universities are up top, no confounding factors. We had a look at universities that produced the highest offer rates. And the correspondence here, again, Russell Group comes out on top. But interestingly, we see that there is 4 non-Russell Group universities in these charts as well. The University of St Andrew up there at the top, University of Bath, London Business School, and Strathclyde as well. When we looked at top universities by sector in terms of applicants who receive an offer, so looking at offer rates rather than volume here across these specific sectors, again, folks, the Russell Group is top of the charts. And finally, we see that the Russell Group prevails when we looked at which universities bring in the majority of certain demographics. And that's the case both for demographics who come from a marginalised background, we look at disabled folks, ethnic minority applicants, but also for those who aren't from a marginalised background. We have on the charts here white applicants and men as well. So interesting to see the real prevalence of the Russell Group across these charts again. So our next section is revealing the trends and predictions in hiring, which we at Fearless Futures produce using predictive modeling. So we use something called bespoke regression analysis. There we go. Which allows us to identify how various factors, be it gender, ethnicity, education background, how those factors affect an applicant's likelihood of receiving an offer. Whilst accounting for everything else. So what this approach helps us to do is firstly isolate the impact of each factor, which means we can provide insights into really specific areas where those inequities or imbalances may be existing. But also it allows us to bring those factors together. So rather than just looking at the impact of gender on the likelihood of an applicant receiving an offer, we're able to look at gender and also things like university background or media source. And what we'll see as we go through is sometimes what appears as one story when we look at one factor. So we might look at gender and think we see one picture. When we start to intersect gender with other factors, we can see all sorts of specific trends for applicants of different backgrounds, even if they're all women. So to make statistically significant estimates, some of our categories in the overview that I shared had to be omitted just to sample size constraints. So we're really zooming in here on the key insights that we think will be most powerful for you and are also statistically the most significant. You'll see some of these graphs. It's a box and whisker graph. If you've never seen one, don't worry. I'll tell you what you need to be looking at. But just as a highlight, in case you do want to interpret the graphs, the points indicate a probability of receiving an offer. Tails are a margin of error, or lines are a margin of error. Small tails are the most certain. If they're longer tails, there is more uncertainty in the statistical significance. And finally, the colours indicate the intersection between two factors, for example, ethnicity and Russell Group background. So what did we find? There's some key trends that we were able to reveal, I've gone too far, when we looked at certain factors alone. So we looked at media source, university background, degree, discipline, and sector as standalone factors. And what we found is, in terms of media source, the impact of this on likelihood of receiving an offer, internal referrals have a very, very high predicted offer rate. So it's almost 10 times higher than other media sources. Word of mouth comes in second and has a 3% offer rate. And then jobs boards, social media, and LinkedIn are the worst performing with offer rates between 1% and 2%. We see that Russell Group university background is not just the most prominent in those charts, but it also translates in terms of offer likelihood. So those with the Russell Group background, almost twice as likely to get an offer than those who don't have Russell Group education. We had a look at degree discipline, and actually it's really kind of confined to the professional service employers in the data set where that data is being gathered on degree discipline of applicants. And so we see in professional services, IT grads have the lowest predicted offers, whereas social science, politics, and STEM grads are 40% more likely to receive an offer than business or finance when we look at those comparatively. So some interesting data there where we have the degree discipline. We had a look at sectors, and we found that candidates applying to retail and engineering are the most likely to receive an offer in comparison to financial services and utilities, where offer likelihood is the lowest. What about the DEI and demographic factors? When we looked at these alone, it appears that women are 20% more likely to receive an offer than men, though the story does start to look a bit different in the coming slides. When we looked at ethnicity in receiving offers, white candidates were much, much more disproportionately likely to receive an offer than any ethnic minority candidates. So 5.3 times more likely than Black applicants, 4.8 times more likely than South Asian, 3.4 more likely than Chinese applicants, and 1.7 times more likely than mixed applicants. So some quite stark stats when we look at ethnicity alone. We looked at disability, and apart from in the public sector where there is some specific programming, we couldn't find any discernible differences in the offer likelihoods between candidates who have a disability and those who don't. It's a bit more of a positive picture appearing there. And in terms of socioeconomic factors, again, no discernible differences in likelihoods between those who received free school meals and those who didn't. So that's the kind of high-level trends that we're seeing, but these larger disparities indicate that there is more work to be done to level the playing field, particularly in terms of ethnicity, but also in terms of gender, because we're seeing those big disparities across those two factors. But this is why intersectional analysis is so key. We wanted to know what happens when we look at these factors together. What is the picture that's painted? So starting out looking at the effects of Russell Group for different applicants, again, we saw on average those who went to the Russell Group twice as likely to receive an offer. When we looked at this in intersectionally with gender, there's no difference in advantage for men or women, it's the same. But when we looked at the intersection with ethnicity, we see that Black candidates from Russell Group universities are actually seeing the largest benefits. They have a 6% likelihood compared to Black candidates who are non-Russell Group having a 2%. And this is important because it means that what we're seeing is that for Russell Group candidates who don't have this elite education background, there's a kind of double disadvantage. And so we might assess that Black candidates are kind of having to do extra work through the process in order to, extra work being, for example, to have a Russell Group background, in order to have those better likelihoods of receiving an offer. It's a consistent trend with 2023. So it suggests it's one of those more entrenched patterns and really worth employers kind of turning attention to think about targeted campaigns for the next season, perhaps. We also had a look at the effects of degree discipline for different ethnicities and genders. This is only in professional services, just because that's where we have the data, again, on degree discipline. There was no disparity in terms of gender, no difference in offer likelihood, regardless of degree background for men and women. In terms of ethnic disparities, we see grads from IT and law having the smallest ethnic disparities. Grads from arts and humanities, business and finance having the largest disparities. So specifically here, we see Chinese and white candidates about 3 to 5 times more likely to receive offers than Asian and Black applicants. When we looked for Black applicants specifically, we see that in professional services, those candidates who graduated in law, STEM, social science, politics, or economics are about 3 to 4 times more likely to receive an offer than Black candidates who graduated in business or finance, IT, or arts and humanities. So understanding these dynamics can support employers, we hope, to really think deeply about those targeted efforts for applicants of particular disciplines and degree backgrounds to ensure they have what they need to try and demonstrate their capability and succeed in receiving an offer. Moving on then to look at the effect of both ethnicity and the source of an application. So you'll remember we pointed out that internal referrals, word of mouth, top 2 sources in terms of volume. But also, interestingly, we see that these applicants are disproportionately white. Whereas when we look at jobs boards and LinkedIn applicants, which are the worst performing media source, they're disproportionately South Asian and what's categorized in the data as Asian other applicants. Worth noting that the employment program applicants are disproportionately Black, and this coincides with the focus of many of the employment programs of this season in the data. So really important to have this kind of zoom in intersectionally when we think about media source. We start to see that those most likely to receive an offer are not just coming through internal referrals, but those applicants are also most likely to be white applicants. And the same being when we look at jobs boards and LinkedIn applicants. We also had a look at ethnicity in sectors, and we found that in financial services, there's very little, no noteworthy effect of ethnic identity on offer outcomes. In engineering, though, white and mixed candidates are much, much more likely to receive an offer than other ethnic identities. So a zoom in there, worth focusing on this season, perhaps. There is quite large disparities in the offer rates between white and Chinese candidates, depending on the industry that they are applying to, which is indicated in the box and whisker graph there. So really worth having those sort of sector-specific insights in order to understand what the experiences are, because it varies a lot for applicants of different ethnic backgrounds in these different sectors. Looking here at gender, ethnicity, and sector, so bringing three different kind of factors together, you'll remember that when we looked at gender alone, it looked like a very, I suppose, positive story, but perhaps still we would say quite unbalanced. It appears that cisgender women are 20% more likely to receive an offer than cisgender men. So we're not including trans gender candidates in this data. But women, 20% more likely to receive an offer than men when we first look at the gender outcomes or probabilities. But when we looked at sector, we found that this disparity only exists in professional services and engineering. It's only there that women are more likely to receive an offer than men. And what's really important is that our analysis shows this increased likelihood of receiving an offer is only statistically significant for white women in the data for this season. So for white women candidates, they're 20 to as much as 35% more likely to receive an offer than men. But that's not the case at all for those of mixed heritage, South Asian, Black, or other racial and ethnic backgrounds. So really, really a great example, albeit a bit disappointing, I'm sure, to see the power of having intersectional analysis and insights. Finally, just some recommendations based on the data that we've seen. We always encourage folks to not just think intersectionally in terms of data, but also in terms of campaigns. So, for example, if you're running a program that seeks to attract more women, building in specific initiative to attract and welcome women from ethnic minority backgrounds as well is really, really important. The data that I showed today might feel like something you could never do in your context, but we encourage folks to experiment on smaller pools of data so you can unlock kind of intersectional insights, perhaps on a particular program that you ran, and really encourage everyone to download and have a read of the report where we go into some more detail of recommendations for employers this year. Hopefully that was useful for you all. And I've just about stuck to time, but I'll just say a massive thanks also to the Amberjack team. We really enjoy working on these insights, and it's been a pleasure to present. And I think I'm handing back to you, Emily.
Yes, very briefly. Thank you, everybody. And thanks for all of those insights. I know there was a lot to pack into a pretty short amount of time. You will see here on the screen a QR code that will allow you, oh, it's gone backwards, hang on, to download the report or register to receive a copy of the report. So if you just click on that and enter your details, once the reports are released next week, we will ensure that you get a copy. I do believe there's a few questions in the chat. So Stephen, I don't know if you want to just take those over and field those out to the team.
Sure, we'll do. And firstly, thanks for a great session. There's huge amounts of content in there. I've got loads of questions myself, but I'm not going to be selfish. Let's get straight into these because we've got limited time left. I think the first one's an easy one. You've got the reports there. Are we going to send the slides as well, Emily?
Yeah, can do. No
Cool.
problem at
Yeah,
all.
we can do that afterwards with a follow-up email. And of course, the recording will go too. So I'll try and do these in order, though I've got questions in the Q&A box as well as the chat function, so we'll try and pick them both. The first question was on reneges and the average being 10%. Was that at point of offer, so it's simply reneging on an offer. It wasn't people dropping out of any other areas in the selection process. I'm assuming it's just offer.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, it's after they've accepted an offer and then renege it at a later date. Yeah.
Got it. Thanks. That's a pretty straightforward one. I think the advertising sector one will be quite straightforward as well. Laura's asked a question: is why is the advertising sector data not included?
I would say that is
Advertising sector data. So we don't have any. You didn't have any data on the advertising sector as a
the
separate sector.
Yeah, so basically we can only obviously report on the organisations that have completed the survey. So, and unfortunately not everyone does it. So we can only report on the sectors that have completed the survey. So unfortunately not all of them are represented.
Right, that's what I thought the answer was, because I'd say the same for the ISE data. Actually, there aren't that many volume advertising sector programmatic employers out there. So yeah, it's a much smaller industry, much more varied. Yeah, so we're the same. Okay. So a few comments and questions around the Russell Group. So I'm going to try and sort of pull them all together. So if I can summarize one of the questions, it's around actually, do you think the data is being skewed to show that predominance of that success of Russell Group candidates, because that's where employers are targeting candidates, or employers casting the net wide, but it's the Russell Group students that are more likely to get through regardless of the employer's activity?
I'll let Ruby just go on this one because she's obviously done the data analysis. So
thanks, Emily. So the beauty, if you like, of regression modeling and probability modeling is that we are accounting for all other factors. So we can say that the likelihood of receiving an offer is a true representation of the impact of Russell Group background alone. Whereas when we're looking just in terms of distribution, that can sort of include other factors, like perhaps certain employers indexing for the Russell Group and so forth. But the probability modeling is your source of truth.
Thanks, Ruby. And Ruby, can I ask this question from Claire now? I'm doing what lawyers say you're not supposed to do. I'm asking her a question because I really don't understand. So I'm hoping that you do. Claire's asked about actually the findings being raw effects without any control variable. So my summation is Claire's asking is actually, where are the variables interacting with each other? Do they all exist in the same model, or are you counting these factors separately? Does that make sense?
I think so. Hopefully I'm understanding correctly. So the first charts that I showed, the kind of table where I went through the key headlines, that's when we're just looking at, we're running the model on individual factors, but intersectionality is at the heart of our approach. And it's why we work so closely with Amberjack, because we know that unless we run all of these factors through the same model, we can't say that some other variable isn't impacting. And so it's where we start to bring everything together that we're able to see the truest kind of outcomes the truest probabilities of offer. So everything I went through in the second half of the probability modeling, those trends are based on us putting all of the factors into the model together. Hopefully that answers the question.
Got it. I think it does. So, Claire, if we've not answered it fully, then please do drop me a note afterwards, and we'll come back to you separately. So, a question here on placement applications. So, talking about placement applications being the lowest, and it's I think that's pronounced Dolly, D-O-L-I, has asked, do we know if this is due to the roles available, or is it student engagement? So, is it due to the volume of roles, or actually are students just not engaging with placements to the same extent they do with other activities?
Yeah, so it would be the first point. So we're actually analysing data that from the client, essentially, that Amberjack work with. So that will be based on the number of opportunities available, I would say, rather than the engagement piece.
Right, thanks. And that's just going back to some of the questions from the early bits of data that you guys covered. So firstly, around AI, have you got any examples yet of where AI is being used and where it brings the biggest benefits to employers? Or are we not quite there yet?
I don't know if that's one for you and for Sue, maybe.
I think this was asked when Sue was presenting, so one for
That was nicely handed over there, Martin.
Bat it off, Martin. Bat it off.
In truth, in attraction, I don't think we have great depth of information at the moment. We do use some AI elements, so we use simple things to remove social bias from job adverts. We write them in person, but we then run them through some technology to make sure that we do that. We're having a look at automated web chats and things like that. So there are bits of it, but I think we need to get into it a little bit more in terms of attraction as to how it is being used, because I think some people might be using things that are a little bit more AI based than they realize at this stage. So definitely one that I'd like to explore a bit more. So I don't have too many examples at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. So we're in a similar boat. And of course, I think you're touching on there was that boundary of what is tech and what is AI, and it's not necessarily totally,
Yes.
yeah, binary, the difference between the two. Fab. A question I had, and I think this is for you, Martin, just on the back of that, it was interesting what you said about AI increasing the performance of candidates. I wonder if you think that means employers are going to have to get better at assessing the influence of AI, or will the bar just generally raise? Because that has all sorts of implications for employer selection process, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we have been obviously monitoring it really closely in season. There's two differences here. When in our assessments, we look at the sort of auto score element. And even when we've used exactly the same assessment method year on year, we haven't seen a shift in performance on the auto scored element of our data. So it's interesting to see the number of organizations that are saying that they are seeing it. What we are seeing, we manually score all of our video interviews, and we have been tracking how many we think are being completely scripted by generative AI, and we think there's about 8% of responses that are using a specific generative AI script. Now, if you just scored them on their content, a lot of them would pass our benchmarks. So it is a concern, and that is supported by the academic literature. But you can say, and again, this is also in the academic literature, you can spot when people are using generative AI with quite a degree of confidence and accuracy. And part of what we do with our manual screeners is train them in what generative AI is responding to those items and allowing them to flag when they think there's a suspicious response pattern. And that is really, really helping us identify. And then it's working with the clients to understand what they want to do with it. So there are a lot of clients, and this is sort of our default position, where we're encouraging them to say, we want to hear the authentic you. We don't want to hear a response generated from AI. So if you are very, very confident that they have really, really scripted, and you can see it in either their behaviors in the video interview or through their content, you've got a good rationale to sort of say, unfortunately, this isn't the right opportunity for you.
Got it. Great. Thanks, Martin. I'm sure that's a subject we're going to come back to an awful lot in the future. We are slightly over time, but I'm sure people won't mind. We had so many questions and so much stuff to get into there. I think we covered pretty much all the questions, but apologies if I missed something on my two screens. Drop us an email and I'll pass them on to the team. Emily, if people want to get in touch with you guys, is it through that QR code? Is that the best way to do it?
Yeah, you can obviously register to get the reports from next week via the QR code, or you can pick up with us individually. You can find us on LinkedIn, etc. if you've got any specific questions. I'll make sure that our details are included when we send the follow-up email out with the deck.
Fantastic. And of course, we will also be sending you a copy of the recording, and that'll be available on the ISE website. Emily and team, really thanks for a great session. There are lots of insight. It really is great, the partnership work we do with yourselves at Amberjack. There's so much stuff that we're able to bring to members that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So Emily, Martin, Ruby, Sue and Jenny, I think I've remembered you all. Thanks for a great session. Really interesting. Hope to see you all again soon. Bye for now.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.